Somewhere beneath the joggers in Riverside Park, beneath the dog walkers and the parents pushing strollers along Manhattan's Upper West Side, a man named Carlos was making breakfast. He had a microwave, he had a refrigerator, he had a printer, two computers, and a space heater running off electricity he had wired into the tunnel's power lines himself. And all of it sat inside a concrete chamber, about 30 feet below the surface of one of the most expensive neighborhoods in New York City. Carlos was a 48-year-old Cuban immigrant who had come to America 27 years earlier looking for a better life. And for 2 years, he had found one. Just not where anyone would have expected. His home was inside the Freedom Tunnel, a 2.6-mile Amtrak railroad passage running beneath Riverside Park from 72nd Street all the way up to 124th Street on Manhattan's West Side. And every single appliance in his underground apartment, every computer, every kitchen device, every piece of furniture had been keyed from the garbage on the streets above. The man did not just survive down there. He thrived. He kept the walls scrubbed clean. He organized his space like a proper studio apartment. He even had internet access. And when a YouTuber named Eric Swanson stumbled into his world back in 2007, the footage he captured shocked millions of viewers who had absolutely no idea this kind of life existed directly beneath their feet. But Carlos was not the first person to call this tunnel home. Not even close. Before him, there were dozens of others. An entire society with its own mayor, its own economy, its own laws. And the strangest part is that none of them were supposed to be possible because the tunnel they lived in was built by a man who spent his entire career making sure people like them had nowhere to go. His name was Robert Moses. In the 1930s, he was the most powerful, unelected man in New York. Moses built the Freedom Tunnel during the Great Depression for a simple reason. Wealthy Upper West Side apartment dwellers did not want to look at freight trains rolling past their windows, so Moses buried the railroad. He sank the tracks into the bedrock of Manhattan, and he laid a manicured park on top. For decades, it worked exactly as intended. Trains ran through the dark while the neighborhood above jogged over them, never once thinking about the industrial world humming under their feet. Then, in 1980, Amtrak shut the line down. The trains stopped, the tunnel went dark, and a 2.6-mile stretch of warm, sheltered, dry concrete sat empty in the middle of a city that was about to need it badly. By the late 1980s, New York was drowning in a homelessness crisis. Thousands of people slept on the streets every single night. City shelters were overcrowded, underfunded, and notoriously dangerous. Theft was constant. Violence was routine. Some shelters had pest infestation so severe that a park bench felt like the safer bet. So when word spread that there was a massive empty tunnel running for 50 city blocks beneath one of Manhattan's nicest neighborhoods, with concrete walls that killed the wind and ceiling grates that let in daylight, people started climbing down. Around 50 homeless New Yorkers moved into the Freedom Tunnel almost immediately. They dragged in plywood and scrap metal. They built shacks along the walls. They tapped the electrical lines that still ran through the passage. They set up camps with kitchens, sleeping areas, even living rooms with chairs and tables. Within a few years, the population grew to 100 people. And here is what makes the next part so hard to watch. Everything these people built, every shack, every kitchen, every wall of art, every rule they agreed to live by, had a hidden expiration date. None of them knew it yet, but the clock was already running. Because for now, this was not some lawless encampment. This was a structured community, and it had a leader. His name was Bernard Isaac, a charismatic, articulate New Yorker who gave himself the title Lord of the Tunnel. Bernard ran the underground the way a small-town mayor runs a village. He set the rules: no yelling, no stealing, no belligerence. There was no curfew like in the city shelters, but there was mutual respect. and he enforced it. He was the community spokesperson, sitting down with journalists, nonprofits, and government officials who wanted to understand what was happening beneath Riverside Park. Bernard's camp looked nothing like what you would picture for a homeless man. Through the ceiling grates, daylight filtered down and lit his space. He had 4 metal folding chairs arranged neatly beside the concrete pillars, and a stack of magazines on one of them, Sports Illustrated, Newsweek, and The New Yorker. Behind the chairs were cupboards stocked with coffee cans, cereal boxes, and bags of spaghetti. In the center, a fire burned between 2 large stones with a blackened grill on top. On the dark wall behind the flames loomed a massive mural, a reproduction of Goya's famous firing squad painting, retitled The 3rd of May, 1992, painted by firelight during the tunnel's best years. Remember that mural, it matters later. Bernard made his money collecting redeemable cans from the streets above. At 5 cents a can, hauled to supermarkets in heavy bags, he pulled in $80 to $100 a day. He was not alone in the hustle. Other residents collected books from the trash and from apartment superintendents along Riverside Drive, then sold them to sidewalk booksellers. One man rebuilt broken computers he found on the street. Another refurbished discarded electronics. Contrary to what every New Yorker assumed, these people were not begging. They had built an entire underground economy out of the city's garbage. The community itself was a cross-section of New York at its most vulnerable. There were Cuban refugees who had lost their immigration papers, Vietnam veterans haunted by what they had seen, former cooks battling addiction, and runaways with nowhere else to go. One couple, a reclusive Vietnam veteran named Joe and his wife Kathy, kept 20 cats in their section of the tunnel. A woman called Brooklyn became a kind of singing spokeswoman for the whole community. Meanwhile, graffiti artists had found the tunnel's enormous blank walls and turned them into one of the most important underground art galleries in America. The biggest mark was left by an artist named Chris Pape, who went by Freedom. His murals would later be recognized as foundational works of American graffiti, and the tunnel took its name from him, a name with a double meaning: freedom the artist and freedom from the brutal life on the streets above. Bernard once told a reporter, "We eat as we choose down here. We live as well, if not better, than the average people up top." In another interview, he said, "I don't choose to be a robot within the system. We dared to be ourselves." He had no idea how little time was left. In 1991, Amtrak decided they wanted the tunnel back, and when workers went underground to assess the renovation, they froze. They were standing inside a functioning village. Shacks wired with pirated electricity, cooking stations with working stoves, personal belongings stacked floor to ceiling. Nearly 100 people who had built layered, complicated lives in the dark, directly under Amtrak's railroad. The evictions started almost immediately. Amtrak police swept the tunnel. Bulldozers rolled in and flattened the shanty towns. Years of work, homes built piece by piece out of the things New York threw away, crushed in a matter of hours. But the bulldozers weren't the end of the story. Somebody had been filming. Around this same time, a young British man named Mark Singer had been living in the tunnel alongside the homeless community. Singer had moved to New York to model, but he became fascinated by the people he kept seeing on the streets, heard about the world beneath Riverside Park, and moved in himself. He had never made a film. He didn't own a camera. No training, no crew, no budget. He did something no one else would try. He made the tunnel residents his film crew. A resident named Henry, who powered his underground home by splicing into the streetlights above, became the production's electrician. Others learned to run the 16mm camera that a sympathetic Manhattan camera shop kept lending Singer, replacing it every time the tunnel's dust destroyed another one. Singer turned an old manual rail cart into a camera dolly, mounting it right on the tracks for sweeping shots through the dark. When he ran out of money for film stock, Kodak sent him free damaged rolls. For 2.5 years, Singer lived and filmed underground. The result was Dark Days, a black and white documentary scored by DJ Shadow that won 3 awards at Sundance in 2000. Singer gave a dozen of his homeless subjects partial ownership of the film. 3 of them died before it was even released, and the film did something the bulldozers never expected. It fought back. The attention from Dark Days let singer and photographer Margaret Morton pressure the Coalition for the Homeless into action. When Amtrak moved to clear the last camps for good, they argued that without a real alternative, these people would simply land back on the streets or in the same dangerous shelters they had fled. They won. They secured housing vouchers from the federal government. Several of the film's subjects moved from the tunnel into actual apartments for the first time in years. But not every ending was a good one. One former resident became a hotel manager and started his own cleaning company. Another committed suicide by jumping in front of a train. Another was found dead, alone in an apartment. Some simply disappeared and were never heard from again. So the camps were gone. The community was scattered. As far as Amtrak was concerned, the tunnel was finally empty. They were wrong. They had just walked right past a man, and they would not be found for another 20 years. If you have been finding this useful, take a second and hit subscribe. I cover stories like this every single week, and the next one is already in the works. His name was Walter, and the reason Amtrak missed him is the most interesting thing about him. Every other resident gave themselves away. Bonfires, barking dogs, noise that carried down the concrete. Walter gave them nothing. He had found the tunnel back in the 1980s after his work dried up, and he got into trouble, and from the start he did the opposite of everyone else. No fire anyone could see, no pets, no noise. He lived deep inside the passage, down a ladder, in a space he had carefully divided into separate rooms like a real apartment. He ran electricity. He kept a phone to stay in touch with his family. He even had a video game console hooked up. So when the bulldozers came through in the early 1990s and crushed the shanty towns, they rolled right over Walter's world without ever knowing it was there. The community scattered. Walter stayed exactly where he was, invisible in the dark, and became one of the last original residents of the Freedom Tunnel. For the next 2 decades, he stayed. He earned money rebuilding discarded computers and selling books to neighborhood vendors. When Eric Swanson finally filmed him in 2007, Walter gave a full tour of the home he had built with the unmistakable pride of a man showing off a place that was entirely his own. "I'm pretty well off," Walter said on camera. "You won't find many down here who have as much as I do. When I come home, forget about the rest of the world. This is like my castle." Walter died in 2012. His family later confirmed he had been hit by a train inside the tunnel that had been his home for more than 20 years. And that same year, his death seemed to mark the end of everything. Amtrak launched another full-scale sweep. Workers painted over every one of Freedom's graffiti murals, covered the Goya reproduction, buried the entire gallery under flat, gray institutional paint. They hauled out the last of the belongings. They removed the last people still living inside. One of those last people was Carlos, the man making breakfast. By the time Swanson found him in 2007, Carlos's underground home was already a marvel. Every item had a history. The refrigerator came from a sidewalk where someone had abandoned it during a move. The computers were dumped by an office building doing a tech upgrade. The microwave, the printer, the space heater, all rescued from the city's trash and carried down through narrow passages that thousands of New Yorkers walked past every day without a glance. But here is what separated Carlos from a man simply collecting junk. Wiring live appliances inside a tunnel that floods when heavy rain hits the streets above is a way to get killed. Carlos knew which lines were still live. He knew how to make it safe. He kept everything organized, everything functional, everything clean. People watching that footage were not looking at an encampment. They were looking at an apartment that happened to sit 30 feet underground. And then, around 2012, Amtrak police found him. They pulled him out of the home he had built with his own hands and arrested him for trespassing on railroad property. The apartment he had assembled, piece by piece, entirely from things New York City threw away, was erased. Years later, Swanson ran into Carlos by chance on a Manhattan sidewalk. He was actually on his way to film what the entrance of Carlos's old home looked like now. At first, Carlos did not recognize him. Then it clicked, and the two of them stood on the street talking about a world that no longer existed 30 feet below where they were standing. That entrance looks nothing like it used to. Riverside Park has been redeveloped, and now there are bike paths, dog parks, basketball courts, and a cafe, all within sight of where Carlos once climbed underground. The entrance itself is fenced off, holding construction vehicles and maintenance equipment, but here is what the people walking that park every morning will never realize. The tunnel emptying out did not end any of this. It just moved it. In 2022, the MTA reported that hundreds of people were still living inside subway stations and tunnel systems across the city. As recently as 2015, people were still being found in the Freedom Tunnel itself. One of them was a 54-year-old former Marine who had been living there since 1982, cooking stew over wood fires from food that vegetable markets had thrown out. 33 years underground. And it is not only New York. Beneath the Las Vegas Strip, an estimated 1,000 people live inside the storm-drained tunnels under the casinos. They have furnished those spaces with beds, bookshelves, and makeshift showers. In summer, the ground above can pass 120 degrees, which turns the cooler tunnels into less of a choice and more of a necessity. An author named Matt O'Brien spent 5 years exploring them, wrote a book about what he found, and started a charity to bring water, food, and clean clothes to the people living down there. Same story as Carlos, different desert. Because when Carlos built his underground home, the millions who watched the footage all seemed to feel the same complicated knot of things: fascination, sadness, and something harder to name. Carlos was not just surviving, he was building. He was solving problems. He was making order out of chaos in a city that had told him, in every way it could, that he did not exist. The comments said it better than I can. Carlos seems like a pretty resourceful and useful guy to have around. He is so resilient and was happy. The authorities should have left him alone. And maybe that is the part that stays with you. The man had electricity, a refrigerator, computers, heat, a clean, organized place to live. He was not hurting a single person. He was not asking anyone for anything. He had built a functioning home out of what New York City threw in the garbage, and then they arrested him for trespassing. Before Bernard Isaac died, someone asked the Lord of the Tunnel whether he would do it all over again, whether he would still choose to live underground. His answer did not take a second. Unquestionably, today the Freedom Tunnel is quiet. The murals are painted over. The shacks are gone. The electrical taps are dead. Walter is gone. Bernard is gone. Carlos is back on the streets. The tunnel that once held 100 people, their kitchens, their pets, their private art gallery, and their fragile rules for living together in the dark, is just a passage for trains again. But if you know exactly where to look beneath Riverside Park, you can still find traces. You can find a few of Walter's belongings on the landing where a ladder used to be. You can see faint outlines under gray paint where Freedom's murals once told stories to a city that had forgotten the people telling them. Over 6,000 miles of tunnel run beneath one of the most crowded cities on Earth, and we still have not figured out how to give everyone a place to live above it. The next story goes even deeper. Click the video on screen right now.